They say that time is the only truly democratic thing in the world. No matter how rich you are, you cannot buy an extra second. But if you spend enough time around mechanical watches, you realize that is a lie. The rich have always bought time, they just buy it enclosed in 18-karat gold, ticking with the heartbeat of 100 tiny gears. I grew up surrounded by those heartbeats. I stood in the cold, damp basement workshop of Sterling Horology Group, holding a water-damaged cardboard box. Inside were my father's old watchmaking tools, a set of micro-screwdrivers, a brass loop, and an unfinished mechanical movement wrapped in tissue paper. Sterling, for 3 generations, that name meant perfection. My grandfather, George Sterling, was a legendary master watchmaker who restored historic timepieces for museums and crafted bespoke watches for collectors. He taught my father, and my father taught me. Clara, my father used to say, looking through his loop, a quartz watch runs on electricity, but a mechanical watch runs on human soul. The mainspring stores the life you wind into it. But after my father passed away, and my grandfather's mind faded into dementia, the brand was seized by my stepfather, Victor, and his son, Julian. They cared nothing for the soul of watchmaking. They rebranded the company into the corporate Sterling Horology Group, moving production to offshore factories. They flooded the market with cheap, battery-powered quartz fashion watches made of plastic and plated brass, sold at a massive markup. Despite my training at a prestigious watchmaking school in Switzerland, Victor demoted me to a basement repair technician. My job was to replace leaking batteries in cheap fashion watches and swap out broken plastic gears. I was paid barely enough to cover my grandfather's medical bills. I stayed only to protect the historic archives and grandfather's original workbench in the basement. But they wanted to erase every trace of the old way. On a rainy Tuesday, I was called up to Victor's executive suite. The office was sleek, filled with minimalist glass furniture and chrome. Victor sat behind a marble desk, while Julian lounged on a leather sofa, tossing a gold-plated fashion watch in his hand. Victor tossed a printout at my feet. "Clara, you refused to clear the new Sterling Sport collection for shipment." "Why?" I didn't bend down to pick up the paper. I looked at him calmly, because the dials are labeled Swiss-made, but the movements inside are $5 plastic quartz modules from an uncertified factory. Selling these at $1,000 is fraud. It ruins my grandfather's name. Julian sneered, standing up and stepping close to me. "Grandpa's name belongs to the corporation now, Clara. No one cares what's inside the watch as long as the logo looks good on Instagram. You're holding up a $10 million holiday campaign because of your outdated morals." Victor adjusted his tie, his voice flat and cold. "You have your father's stubbornness, Clara, but none of his business sense. We are renovating the basement to store packaging materials. Your services are no longer required. Hand over your security badge and leave." I looked at Julian. "What about Grandpa's original tools? The master lathe?" Julian walked over to the corner, picked up my cardboard box, and pushed it into my arms. "This junk is all you get. The rest belongs to the company. Get out, Clara, before we call building security." No one in the building looked at me as I walked out. The young marketing interns and the new factory managers stared at their phones. I walked into the cold Boston rain, clutching the box to my chest. I sat in my tiny studio apartment, the neon lights from the street reflecting off the wet glass. My hands were stained with watch oil and solvents. I felt hollow. The family legacy was gone, replaced by plastic and marketing hype. I pulled my father's old watchmaking tool chest out of the soggy box. It was a beautiful mahogany box, its corners brass-bound, heavy and solid. I ran my fingers along the bottom felt lining. Underneath the velvet, my fingers felt a slight ridge. A hidden compartment. I took a spring bar tool and pressed it into a tiny pinhole on the side. With a soft click, the bottom panel popped up. Inside lay a velvet pouch, a brass key, and a sealed letter from my grandfather, written before the dementia took his memories. I opened the letter. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, Victor and Julian have done what I feared. They have chased the shadow of money and abandoned the substance of time. But they cannot steal what they do not understand. The brass key in this envelope belongs to a safe deposit box at the Boston Merchants Bank. Inside, you will find the original designs and the completed prototype of the caliber 18, the masterwork movement your father and I spent 10 years designing. It is a tourbillon movement of unmatched precision, a true independent watchmaking marvel. Along with the prototype, you will find the deed to the old clock tower building on Harbor Street. I bought it decades ago. It is yours. Do not let them turn the sterling name into a lie. Build your own time, my child. I opened the velvet pouch. Inside was a heavy, solid gold pocket watch. I wound it gently. It was the caliber 18. Looking through my loupe, I saw the tourbillon cage rotating effortlessly, defying gravity, the hand-polished steel bridges reflecting the light like mirrors. It was a work of absolute genius. Victor and Julian thought they had taken everything. They had no idea they had left me the crown jewel. The next week, I moved into the historic clock tower on Harbor Street. It was a beautiful, old brick building, its massive mechanical clock overlooking the Boston Harbor. I cleaned the space, set up my grandfather's lathe, and hung a brass sign beside the heavy oak door, Sterling Horology Studio. I was going to build watches the way they were meant to be built, one at a time, entirely by hand. My days became a rhythm of microscopic precision. I worked under a high-powered microscope, polishing tiny steel wheels with gentian wood, bending hairsprings by hand to a fraction of a millimeter, and hand-engraving German silver plates. I started posting videos of my work online. I didn't add flashy music or talking. I just let the microphone capture the raw, satisfying sounds of watchmaking, the crisp click of a mainspring winding, the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the balance wheel, and the visual magic of 100 microscopic parts coming together to create life. The internet loved it. Millions of people watched my videos, mesmerized by the extreme focus and patience required to build something so small. They called it mechanical therapy. Within 6 months, a major watch collector from Geneva contacted me. He wanted to commission a custom watch utilizing the caliber 18 movement, encased in platinum. I worked 16 hours a day for 3 months, hand-finishing every single component to Swiss chronometer standards. When I delivered the watch, he was stunned. He posted a review in the world's leading horology magazine, calling me the last true watchmaking prodigy of the new world. Commissions started pouring in from tech founders, artists, and old money collectors who wanted a watch with a soul. I hired 2 young female watchmakers who had been rejected by corporate brands, and together, we turned the clock tower into a sanctuary of high horology. While my studio flourished, the corporate Sterling Horology Group was running out of time. Victor and Julian had taken their brand public, promising investors massive growth. To hit their targets, they had lied about their manufacturing, selling cheap quartz imports labeled as luxury American chronometers. The house of cards collapsed when a famous watchdog group bought 3 of their watches, disassembled them on camera, and proved they were made of cheap plastic components that cost less than $10. The Federal Trade Commission launched a massive investigation into consumer fraud. Their stock crashed by 80% in a week. Major department stores pulled their watches from the shelves. But their fatal blow came from a contract they had signed with the International Horological Guild. They had promised to deliver 50 hand-assembled, certified mechanical chronometers for a prestigious charity auction and exhibition in New York. The Guild had pre-sold these watches to billionaire collectors. If Sterling Group failed to deliver, they would face breach of contract lawsuits worth millions, on top of their criminal fraud charges. They had no watchmakers left who could assemble high-end mechanical movements. They had fired them all. One cold evening, Victor and Julian walked into my studio. The walls of my shop were lined with beautifully restored pendulum clocks, their ticking creating a powerful, steady symphony. Victor looked old, his suit hanging loosely on him. Julian was pale, his hands shaking as he held a leather portfolio. I didn't look up from my bench. I was adjusting the balance wheel of a watch, my loupe pressed to my eye. Victor cleared his throat, his voice raspy. "Clara, you've done a remarkable job with this place. Your grandfather would be proud." I laid my tweezers down, removed my loupe, and looked at them. "My grandfather is proud, Victor. But I don't think you came here to talk about pride. Julian stepped forward, opening the portfolio. Clara, we need your help. We need 50 mechanical movements. We know you have the inventory and the production capacity here. We are willing to buy your studio for $3 million. You can run the entire design division of Sterling Group. We'll make you a partner. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, the steam rising between us. I looked at the contract on the desk. $3 million? 2 years ago, you threw me out with a cardboard box and told me mechanical watches were dead weight. You told me nobody cared about what was inside the watch. Julian swallowed hard. We were wrong, Clara. We need these movements in 20 days, or we lose everything. We're family. You have to save the company. I smiled, reached into my desk pocket, and pulled out the small digital voice recorder I had kept from that day. I pressed play. Julian's voice echoed through the clock tower. Grandpa's name belongs to the corporation now, Clara. No one cares what's inside. Go, Clara. Don't make us call building security. I stopped the recording. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the ticking of 100 clocks. I looked at Julian. You said the name belongs to the corporation. But the talent belongs to me. You wanted to build an empire on cheap plastic and lies. Go sell your plastic batteries, Julian. My time is not for sale. Victor's voice cracked. Clara, please. The prosecutors are looking at criminal charges. If we don't deliver these watches, we go to prison. I picked up my loop and put it back over my eye. Then I suggest you start learning how to assemble them yourselves. Good evening, gentlemen. My lead watchmakers stepped forward, pointing toward the exit. Victor and Julian stood frozen for a moment, realizing there was no deal to be made, no amount of money that could buy their way out of this. They slowly turned and walked out into the dark, cold night. Sterling Horology Group declared bankruptcy 3 weeks later. The company was dismantled, and the brand name Sterling was put up for auction. I bought it back for a fraction of its value, returning it to where it belonged, my grandfather's desk. Victor and Julian were convicted of fraud. Julian was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, and Victor was forced to liquidate his personal assets to pay the fines. Today, the clock tower is a hub of independent horology. We only make 20 watches a year. Each one is registered, numbered, and carries the name Sterling and Company Independent Watchmakers. Last Sunday, I sat next to my grandfather at the care home. He doesn't remember much, but when I placed the caliber 18 pocket watch in his hand, his thumb naturally found the crown. He wound it, held it to his ear, and listened to the ticking. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Perfect beat, Clara." I realized then that life is like a mechanical watch. You can try to run it on cheap shortcuts, but eventually, the battery dies and the plastic gears strip. Only what is built with precision, polished with integrity, and driven by passion will keep ticking long after we are gone. If you also believe that true value cannot be rushed, and that quality will always outlast the hype, leave one word in the comments below. Time.